There are a few remarks that Hans-Georg Moeller from the channel Carefree Wandering makes about the place of religion in philosophical inquiry. And I'm going to respond to him indirectly by just stating the correct position we should take on this, because we can often get confused about figuring out how much religion is okay in philosophy. So let's get clear. The two most talented living philosophers, and hopefully they're still living when you're watching this video because they're in their 90s, are Alasdair Macintyre and Chuck Taylor. And they are both, although in quite different ways, Catholics. But they are quite certainly philosophers. So what's the deal? How much religion is okay as part of philosophical process? Well, I think believing in divine revelation is compatible with doing philosophy. I think believing in God as the original cause is compatible with doing philosophy at the highest level. What's not compatible here is if the person takes their religious beliefs and can't question them philosophically, if they can't answer important questions like, you've assembled all of this shit here and all of the books you've written, tell me what happens if there is no God. You see? And if they can't go there, then there's a real problem. And so, therefore, what really matters is a kind of questioning and remaining deeply engaged, but also very open-minded about the answers that you've got. You've got to wake up tomorrow and be prepared to let go the answers you have today. And if you can do that, then you're allowed to say, well, you guys are asking philosophical questions. Well, you know what also asks the same questions and gives some answers? Divine revelation. And so I think that to that extent, the two are simply compatible. And I say that as somebody who believes that there is no God. And to that extent, I take a very different epistemic position to Alasdair Macintyre and Chuck Taylor, but it certainly doesn't disqualify belief in God in a very deep way as being part of somebody's process of doing philosophy. Let's move on to the second thing I wanted to remark on, which is the we. And I want to remark on this freestandingly again, not to make footnotes about footnotes about footnotes. There are two ways, and this is really important, in which throughout the history of philosophy, the better philosophers have talked about we in a self-conscious way, because you always got to know who we is if you're saying we, otherwise you're fluffy. And there are two paths here. One path is to say we in a designative way. You know, so sometimes Hans-Georg Moeller on his channel Carefree Wandering says, we, and he's referring to particular moments of cultural moment. He's referring to people, for example, in a certain historical predicament. So one way of talking about we is to have a designated category of human beings. We as a designative thing. So who is we? It's these people and then those people, but not those people. And these categorizations might be geographic, political, they might be historical, and you're just saying that's who is in, that's who's out. That's one way of talking about we. The second way of talking about we is invitational. And that's when you are not picking out any particular definite group of humans, but you're just saying, I am engaging in inquiry and conversation here, and we is anybody who has the possibility historically and psychologically to engage with me in this conversation, and then whatever comes out of that will come out of it. So there's an invitational we, and then there is a designative we. I wanted to say a little bit about the process of self-help. There is no doubt that most people who are basically younger men, and unfortunately are caught up in a crisis of men that is happening in the West and is moving to the south of Europe from the north of Europe. And Jordan Peterson is becoming more popular in the south of Europe as we speak, and he will be more popular in the south of Europe a year or two from now than he is today. But when we talk about the self-help dynamic that Jordan is participating in, it's very important to make one distinction, and there are about 25 more, but we're going to keep them out of this video, and that's this. Is Jordan helping people to become less screwed up? And I think he's possibly not. Or is he helping people manage their screwed upness better? And I think the answer is he is very probably doing that. That's an important distinction. That's already quite a bit of a thing to do. But nevertheless, it's important to keep the two apart. So what might, as it were, make you less screwed up as opposed to just be a more functional screw up? Well, something like psychoanalytic process, engaging in psychoanalysis. Now, this is a key distinction, because the question that comes out from the question, well, if these men are just being made more functional, the question that comes out of that is, what's next for them? Can they become less screwed up? And what is keeping them screwed up? And this is going to be central to where we're going to land this video, because there is an open-endedness in Peterson's thought that I think nobody has addressed, and he certainly hasn't addressed it in public. And part of the reason he hasn't addressed it is he's spending 99% of his time speaking to people who are YouTubers or comedians or whatever. Some of them are very gifted and brilliant. But is not being sufficiently intellectually challenged here. So we're going to land this video with a remark about that and how that relates to what Nietzsche teaches us. The next thing I wanted to mention is this business of profilicity. And I'm not going to dive into this because Hans-Georg Moeller from the channel Carefree Wandering has co-authored a book on this, and I'm actually going to read it and do a clip on that in the next couple of months. But what is still unclear at this point is, if we're living in an age of profilicity, what does that mean for the psychological reality of the people engaged in profile building? Because we don't want to risk giving a social explanation of participation in social roles without giving an account at the level of psychological reality of how this works. And that's why Peterson's question, which he left in the comment, remains pertinent. And he put it bitely. Worst of all, you claim as realistic your conclusion that all we offer in the world is something akin to approval seeking, a set of approval-seeking false selves with nothing genuine at the bottom. And Hans-Georg Moeller is qualified, doesn't think that's all there is. And I ask you in all seriousness, Peterson says, is that a philosophy or is that a confession? Well, the way this conversation is going to proceed is we're going to have to figure out what the psychological reality is. We know what the psychological reality is of something like developing your authenticity, discovering your authenticity, the way Nietzsche talked about becoming who one is. But what it means to develop your profile as far as what the hell is going on inside your head and what the hell should be going on inside your head as you're doing that remains unclear. And one thing that I must say still does remain a little bit unclear to me is what this whole business of the sovereign individual means, precisely when Hans-Georg Moeller is talking about it. And I'm not saying that I am confused by what he says. I am saying that I still see several mapped possibilities for what he is saying could mean, and I'm not clear which one of these possibilities it is. And that's not a fault, because I think that's just YouTube, and we're going to discover more from Hans-Georg Moeller's co-written book. But it's a little bit tricky because, I mean, you know, like Hans, I've spent a lot of time with philosophers whose names we're familiar with, and I have, I'm professionally engaged in this discipline, and I don't really understand fully precisely what Hans-Georg Moeller's position is. So we're going to discover that in the future. Let's land this on the biggest things we need to discuss, and that's inheritances from Nietzsche for Peterson and what he needs to do with them. That he's not doing. And here, if I'm Jordan's coach, I would be raising some questions about him striking a balance between who he's speaking about. I've noticed he's spoken to a few people recently who've challenged him, like Ian McGilchrist, for example. But I think that Jordan needs to strike a better balance between developing himself intellectually and engaging in all of his public intellectual and self-help activities, because there's a risk that you stop developing intellectually if you do all that he is doing. Strange as that might seem. So there are two key questions we need to land with. Logos. Now, Nietzsche leaves us with a problem. I mean, he says, look, there is a world and, there's a planet. The planet goes around a star. There are clever animals on the planet. The star's going to go out. The planet will disappear. The clever animals will be gone. It'll be as though nothing had ever happened. The cosmic scheme of things is gone for Nietzsche. There are human purposes, but there aren't purposes out there in the cosmos. Has this change happened, Jordan, according to Nietzsche? Has it not? You're denying it? If it has, how are you understanding it? And how are you understanding its implications for your capacity to still go on about accommodating ourselves, making sense of ourselves in terms of a logos or in terms of certain kinds of teleological conceptions, which Nietzsche argued are historically unavailable to us. But as Jordan will also know very well, Nietzsche argued it doesn't mean we don't need them. It's probable, Nietzsche said, that they are both unavailable and necessary. That's one of the dilemmas he leaves us. The bigger issue that Nietzsche leaves for us, and this is really the single biggest intellectual gap in Jordan Peterson's presentation, and we're going to take a deeper dive into this. I've just had Maps of Meaning arrive. It's a book Jordan wrote when he's young, but we'll figure out what's going on there too. And dive into this. And the reason always for diving here is twofold. You've got to make intellectual sense of what's going on, but you've also got to make sense of the phenomena. It's unacceptable to have absolutely so few adequate cultural assessments of what's going on with the Jordan Peterson phenomena when it's affecting so many people and certainly affecting so many men all over the world, not just in North America, not just in Europe. I mean, I've made a tiny amount of content on Jordan Peterson, and it's extraordinary how much just sort of mail you get from people all over the world trying to engage, whose relationship with Jordan Peterson you want to understand and maybe be skeptical about too. But here is the key question. Jordan talks about various crises we are facing in the modern world. And this is where Jordan comes together with some other conservative cultural commentators in facing the same challenge. And Christopher Lasch might be in the same bucket here. Here is the question. Are our deepest problems in 2022, 2021 a product of being human with a bit of cultural particularity in the way that's expressed in our context? Or are our problems fundamentally to do with the nature of the modern world? I'm sorry if I've shouted too much into the microphone. Are our problems fundamentally to do with the modern world, such that they are not the problems other people have had to face? Are they problems which can only be understood if we take modernity as a central historical explanatory category? So it's going to be central to the way we are lost, central to the way life might be unsatisfactory for us. Or is it not? This is absolutely key, because depending on what view you take of this question, your critique of our situation and of our making sense of our situation is going to be vulnerable to falling out of the category of fundamental critique and explanation and just ending up in the category of conservative complaint. In other words, you're saying that and this isn't good, this and that isn't good. Okay, agreed, it's not good. But are you actually explaining how we have got here, why we are here, where we can go next, where we're stuck and where we can't go next? You see, unless you take a view on whether our situation is historically special because of the conditions of modernity, and Nietzsche's answer to that is absolutely yes. Unless you take a view on that, you risk ending up complaining about the world and not explaining it. We're going to land this on Nietzsche here because it's the next topic on this channel. We're going to dive into the eternal recurrence, which is not a cosmological idea, by the way. And then we're going to talk about the real pain points people feel in making sense of Nietzsche, because everybody has books of Nietzsche lying around. But which ones are good? How do you read them? How come he's saying things that don't seem to make sense? He is a genius, but why does he say dumb shit? What is going on here stylistically, and how do I make sense of it? We're going to dive into this. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm grateful this channel, which I'm treating as a sort of microscopic version of the New York Review of Books, and I'm sharing content about Mozart and Schumann and Kant and Haydn and Russian opposition politicians. We're really trying to make sense of the world here, but in a way that the algorithm can't recognize. So I'm particularly grateful to you for this channel with my poor YouTube skills as well, reaching 1,000 followers, and I'm thrilled about being involved in exciting conversations with you going forward. Thanks a lot. Just uploading, I forgot to mention Jordan Peterson and tears. Basically, we'll talk about this more. I don't think that Jordan Peterson's tears are performative. That's the first thing to say about it. I don't think they are at all consciously part of his profile building. They're not manipulative in my view. That's the first point about them. The second point about them is, are they always about the person about whom Jordan is crying? No. They're always a bit about the person and a bit about Jordan. There are some people who cry externally, it's just all about them. But Jordan cries partly out of a kind of existential fragility. And that fragility is arguably, and he talks about this a lot, connected with not just psychological things, but physiological things that he ongoingly has to manage in his body. And certainly one of the remarkable things about him is how close he is to just falling off into kind of abyss. And he still keeps going. That's one of the most admirable qualities about him. So I think the tears are not performative, but they are a little bit self-oriented. They're a little bit sort of caught up in himself when they happen.